Hello, everyone, and welcome. We are going to get started in just a moment, but I wanted to let folks know that this presentation is being recorded. And with that, thank you all for joining us. My name is Max Odkins. I'm an environmental scientist with the Fire and Resource Assessment Program here at CAL FIRE, and I'm very excited to welcome you to this demonstration workshop for a new tool in smoke prediction and management that's been developed by grantees from our Forest Health Research Program. This workshop is called SmokePath Explorer, a new smoke management tool for California. And the tool was developed by teams at Sonoma Technology and the Desert Research Institute. This project was supported by CAL FIRE's Forest Health Research Grant Program, which is funded in part by California Climate Investments, a program that puts cap and trade dollars to work in communities throughout California. Before I turn it over to the research teams to present about their new tool, I do have some quick housekeeping. As mentioned, this webinar is being recorded, and you can find the recording of it in the future on our webinars and events webpage on the CAL FIRE website. You can use the QR code there as well to see recordings of past webinars that we've held from other grantees of the Forest Health Research Grant Program. There will be a more presentation and demonstration portion of this workshop, followed by periods where there will be time for discussion and question and answer. So please feel free to type your questions into the chat at any point during the workshop, and members of the research team may be able to answer your questions just in the chat, or if not, then we'll get to them during the Q&A sections as well. You can also raise your hand at any point, and we'll help moderate any questions that you have and allow people to ask their questions that way as well once we get to those sections of the workshop. So with that, I will pass it over to Samantha Kramer to kick things off and introduce the research team.
Great, thank you so much, Max. Just to confirm that you are able indeed to see my PowerPoint slides in full view?
Yes.
All right, great. Thank you all for taking time to come and learn about the SmokePath Explorer tool. Just as Max had mentioned, that this is a project that is funded by the California Climate Investments Program, and it is a collaborative project between Sonoma Technology and the Desert Research Institute. I do want to also really highlight thank you for CAL FIRE for choosing this project to fund. And we also wanted to acknowledge the California and Nevada Air and Smoke Committee, CANSAC. They've provided a lot of data through that program. And lastly, as Max indicated, the California Climate Investments Program really used the cap and trade dollars and put them to work to reduce greenhouse gas and emissions. So we're really excited to represent some of the work that is paid for through this program. And I do want to give the team a chance to introduce themselves, and I will get us started. Hi, my name is Samantha Kramer. I'm a researcher and program manager at Sonoma Technology. I was a project manager for this project, and I will be leading our webinar today. And I will hand it over next to Charles to introduce himself.
Hey everyone, I'm an air quality data scientist at Sonoma Technology, and for this project I was the lead or the technical lead on dashboard development.
And to Farnaz.
Hello, everyone. My name is Farnaz Hassanpour. I'm the lead principal investigator of this project, and I'm a professor in atmospheric sciences at the University of Nevada, Reno, and the Desert Research Institute. Also serve as the director of Smart Lab at DRI, focusing on addressing environmental issues such as wildfires and their impacts, leveraging cutting-edge technology, including AI, machine learning techniques, etc., to address such challenges. And I'm pleased to join you today and welcome you to this webinar. Hope you find this workshop applicable to your work. Thank you.
Great. And Azmi?
Hi, everyone. I'm Azima Zara Harafte and also assistant research professor at DRI. In this project, I was lead for high split simulation and probability and clustering analysis.
Great. So now that you've met the extremely hardworking team, let's just start with some kind of background here on what we're talking about. So we all know that prescribed fires are one of the most effective tools to reduce hazardous vegetation, hazardous fuels in the form of vegetation. I don't think, given what's happened this month in Southern California, that we need to discuss how important it is to manage our landscape to prevent hazardous wildfires. We are expecting an increase in the amount of prescribed fires and beneficial fires on our landscape in California in the upcoming years. However, anytime we burn vegetation, there is smoke that is produced. And part of a prescribed fire is also managing the smoke impacts downwind on air quality, especially for sensitive receptors such as healthcare facilities and for the youth groups as well. And so we really, as a team in the wildfire and prescribed fire space, we need to come up with ways that we can get more fire on the ground now, but also unify our approach and be able to plan further in advance. So to that point, this project was funded by CAL FIRE to generate the SmokePath Explorer, which can allow for prescribed fire planning and potentially wildfire response in terms of smoke and exposure. And really, the way that this tool works is using 20 years of historical air transport, looking at previous weather to help you narrow in on which days have the highest probability of being a burn window day. It does not replace the day of go, no go, but this allows you to plan months in advance when you're most likely to have a good window and when you're most likely to impact the least amount of sensitive receptors and the public. It also allows you to prepare for upcoming prescribed fires and plan on where you should start communicating, notifying different communities. And again, I think the main thing we were thinking about when we formed this project and this idea was reducing the burden when it comes to smoke permits and smoke management plans, both in terms of generating those plans, but also in the process of reviewing those plans, if you are a reviewer of smoke permits. And I do just want to highlight that the goals for this workshop are to provide an overview of this tool, demonstrate very specific case studies and how you can use this tool right now, and the best way to go about it. And really, the whole point of this project is to create something that we can use now. It does not solve every question we have about prescribed fire. Again, it does not solve the day of go, no go, but it gets us a step closer to being able to get more fire on the landscape and plan ahead. So just today, we'll hear next from CAL FIRE on just some background on prescribed fire, potential uses of this work. Then I'll go on to a general overview of the SmokePath Explorer. We'll then focus on those specific use cases and examples and how you can use it tomorrow if you wanted to. And then, of course, we'll have time for Q&A, discussion, and if you're willing, we do have a very, very short optional survey so that you can tell us what tools you would prefer or want integrated into the tool to make it more useful in the future. And then, of course, at the end, we will be sharing the link to the tool. It is live and freely available. And so we would really encourage you all to, play around with the tool yourself after this webinar. And we're always open to feedback. So with that, I will invite, and if anyone at CAL FIRE would like to speak on this tool, on this project, and the intentions for funding this type of work.
Fantastic. Thank you, Samantha. I'll start by just saying that as a funder of scientific research here at the Forest Health Research Grant Program, we really aim to support research that touches on key issues in forest health and fire science that are critical to the state of California. We really value sharing that scientific information broadly and putting it in the hands of practitioners and technical advisors who are going to be able to make a difference in forest management, fire management, and other vegetation management throughout the state. And so that's partly why we were excited about this project. And we're also really it's very important to us to support the statewide plans that guide California's fire management, including the California Wildfire and Forest Resilience Action Plan. And one of the pieces that is really important to that is there's a substantial increase in fuel management that's needed across the state. That CAL FIRE is striving to increase our fuel treatment, over the next several years. And prescribed fire is a really major piece of that. Here at CAL FIRE, we're engaged in many different levels of prescribed fire action as well as incident response. And we really hope that this tool can be used, like you mentioned, to be able to assist in planning out those projects further in advance in some cases when it comes to expected smoke impacts from prescribed fires, from a variety of different kinds of prescribed fires, whether that's folks who are at the CAL FIRE units engaged in, medium or large scale prescribed burns with other landowners and with other partners as well, down to even smaller pile burn type projects, or whether that's getting this information into the hands of technical advisors that can help other partners to be able to plan their projects further in advance and have some better expectations about what their smoke and air quality impacts are going to be. Of course, the wildfire and incident management is incredibly important to CAL FIRE as well, and we hope that this tool may also be able to help inform what some of the air impacts of current wildfires are going to be, as this tool continues to be developed and put out to use. We're hoping that it can really reach a wide range of different fire managers, prescribed fire proponents who are planning these projects or responding to incidents across the state. So with that, part of what we're excited about here is, we've got this opportunity. You're presenting this workshop to many of the folks who may want to use this tool in the future, and so we're really hoping that this group is also able to provide really good feedback to you and the project team in terms of which pieces are going to be the most useful and which directions it can develop in the future as well. So I'll leave it there. I'll open it if there's anyone else at CAL FIRE who wants to step in for a few words on any other expected uses that you would hope you might get out of a tool like this for predicting smoke from fires. You can go ahead and raise your hand, and we'll let you unmute if you don't already have that capability. All right, not seeing anyone jump to it. I hope that means that I represented us well here, but we are very excited to see what you have here today and where this tool can go in the future.
Great. Yes. Thank you, Max. And I'll just sum that up by saying our whole goal is to use the existing science to make your life easier. So with that in mind, I will get us started on an overview of the SmokePath Explorer as a project in whole before we get into those specific examples on ways you can use it. So, I think we're all aware that the wildfire crisis is a lot due to both human and climate change factors, suppression, and the excessive vegetation that we do have on the ground. And that prescribed fire really is an effective treatment to reduce the fuels and mitigate the wildfire risks. And from the Wildfire and Forest Resiliency Task Force, as well as the California Strategic Plan for Expanding Beneficial Fire, we know that the state plans on increasing the amount of fire we put on the ground by about twofold what we've been seeing in the past. So anywhere between 400 and 500,000 acres per year of beneficial fire. That's a lot of fire, and that's a lot of smoke. And if you think about what areas are priorities, they are close to communities, right? We are trying our best to protect these wildland-urban interface areas where there's vegetation close to communities, but that also puts smoke close to communities. So we really need to at least have some protocol to estimate or evaluate how big our impacts are going to be from a prescribed fire. So just some background on what data went into this tool. Everything here is based on the CANSAC 20-year, 2-kilometer hourly weather reanalysis from 2001 to 2020. I'm sure there's plenty of you on this call that regularly use the CANSAC forecast system, again, hosted at DRI, funded by the CANSAC program. It's a great forecast tool. I personally use it myself. And in this case, they also have a 20-year climatology. So that is the data that we used. And our first goal, our first step in this project was that we reached out to 25 land and air managers in California back in 2023 and asked which fire weather variables are most important for you to prioritize prescribed fire, extreme wildfire conditions, what variables do you use on a daily basis? And that was really informative. I really appreciate those, the 9 folks that did respond to us, and kind of, you can see here on the lower right, which variables were the most important. Obviously, relative humidity and wind direction and wind speed had 100%. I must have these to make any decisions. And then there was a lot of variation from there. So that was great insights, and we did incorporate those thoughts into this tool. And I also want to add, we did include receptor information. So when you're thinking about who might be most impacted by any type of smoke, whether that be wildfire or prescribed fire smoke, education and healthcare facilities really stand out. The most at-risk communities are generally the youth communities, as well as those that have respiratory issues, are already hospitalized, and things of that nature. So we did include education facilities and healthcare facilities in this tool. So you're able to see that when you're looking at potential smoke impacts, as well as total population numbers from the 2020 census. And I just want to add, this is probably the most technical slide you will see, but do not panic, I promise. We'll make it easy. So what we've done here is that we've used the CANSAC historical weather data to run the high split trajectory model. The high split model is what's used in the Blue Sky Playground. So if you've used the Blue Sky Playground in the past, it's the same inherent model. Instead of dispersion mode, we were using trajectory mode. And we ran a trajectory for every single day from 2001 to 2020. And we actually did this at 4 different heights per starting time. So this is an indicator of plume rise. And the way we did this is we looked at basically the mixing height, and we looked at 10% of the mixing height through 80%. So if you think about the different, smoke plume shapes that you can get, something like 80% of the boundary layer height would be a very well mixed plume. You have smoke well mixed through the entire, lower layer of the atmosphere, whereas 10% would be, much smoke hugging closer to the ground. That 200%, that's indicative of a pyro CB, again, trying to at least leave the door open for wildfire use cases. So our 200% would say, hey, I got smoke all the way up to through the troposphere, through the mixed layer. So we made sure to represent that in all the work that we've done. And we also represented a full diurnal profile. We know that, fire doesn't turn off at night, especially because with the goal of burning 500,000 acres per year in beneficial fire, we do need to move towards larger multi-day fires, which means there will be smoke throughout the evening hours, throughout the morning hours, through the day. So we wanted to make sure that we were representing a full day when we looked at possible smoke. So for every single day, 4 times per day, at 4 heights per day, per starting time, we ran a trajectory to see where, if you release smoke, where that air will end up. And I'll just say that ends up to being 1.3 billion model runs. Yes, B as in billion. So there is a lot of data. And another thing we did with that CANSAC data was all of those variables that were identified as, hey, I need these. I cannot do my job without these variables. We did do daily average values across the full 20-year time period as well. So you can see what the daily average value is across that full 20 years, what the maximum and the minimum values were. So you get a kind of an understanding of the total range of values you can get at that time period. Again, trying to help you plan, okay, typically in January, what does my fire weather look like at this location? And then my last technical slide here is that all of this data, so that 1.3 billion trajectory runs, all of the fire weather data and all of those receptors are currently in the cloud and allow you to basically pull that data and calculate probabilities on the drop of a hat. It actually only takes between 20 and 30 seconds to complete the compiling and show it to you on a map, and about 2 to 5 seconds to calculate all the potential receptors. So the healthcare facilities, the education facilities, and the population. So again, with the goal of making your life easier, we've pre-calculated all of the data you could possibly need from this information, and ideally provided it in a very fast manner. I think a total of 35 seconds is pretty impressive for 1.3 billion model runs. Okay, now that I got some of the technical pieces, and I'm more than happy to address any technical questions in the Q&A session, but I don't want us to get bogged down by those items. I do want to present to you the SmokePath Explorer. So this is an online dashboard. It is free and publicly accessible. Again, I will provide a link for that at the end of the workshop. As of now, it's being hosted on the Sonoma Technology servers, but at the end of the project, it will be hosted in a permanent location. So this is what it looks like when you go to the website, and I just wanted to give you kind of a big picture sense, and we're going to go into each piece individually. So it's a single site, all in one place. When you first go to this website, you are given a info or a disclaimer. I know, especially on the government side, we love a disclaimer. And I just want to really highlight that this tool will tell you where smoke is most likely to go given an emission location. However, it does not indicate the total smoke emissions, represent fire size, or the air concentration. I know you guys are all probably panicked right now. Well, how can you not represent the air concentration? Well, in this case, like I said, we're telling you if you produce a significant amount of smoke, here is where it will end up, and here's where you need to plan to have communications, and here's where you need to plan to have a smoke management plan. But like I said, it does not include emissions. That is something we're more than open to including in the future, and we would love that feedback from you. I'll also add here that it does have a link directly to our user guide that both highlights and goes through all this information in text, as well as provide examples. All right, let's talk about user inputs. We do have the option to use presets. However, I am going to primarily talk about custom user selections on this webinar. So this tool allows you to select a full 20-year climatology. You can also filter by month and week. So say you're looking at doing prescribed fires in the month of October, and you want to look at what your typical air transport looks like in the month of October. You could be planning a year out, you could be planning a month out, and still get a good sense of your expected smoke impacts and your typical fire weather for that time of year. This is also where you can select your initialization heights. So again, going back to that representation of your plume height, how deep do we expect smoke to get into the atmosphere for your type of burn? You don't need to know that information, right? So if you are just trying to get a handle on when the best time to burn, I will have a case on that. you're more than welcome to say, you know what, I'll just select all the heights because I'm not super worried about the plume height just yet. I'm just trying to look at the fire weather itself. Or if you're knowing you're going to be doing a big multi-day burn, you definitely want to represent the full mixed layer. So you would want to use 10, 15, 80%. Again, I will be going over this in detail with our case studies. And then lastly, the users can select as well the initialization time. If you know that your fire is going to be producing smoke for a full 24 hours, you can select all. However, if you know you're only going to have a short-lived, say, pile burn that is expected to last about half the day, you can also narrow in your expected smoke impacts for that time of day. And then lastly, you can also select your color scheme. That was added by request. All right. And I want to highlight what comes out of this tool. So once you've selected your location where you're going to burn, what time of year you're interested in, what plume heights you're interested in, and what time of day, you will get a map that shows the probability or the likelihood of areas being impacted by smoke from that fire. So this ranges from very unlikely to very likely. So very unlikely smoke impacts means it's possible, there's a chance, obviously, but it is very unlikely that smoke, especially from a prescribed fire, is going to reach these areas. But it is in the 20-year, variability. The very likely category indicates that, just as stated, it is very likely that if you produce a significant amount of smoke at this location, that smoke will reach these areas. Again, we went with this very unlikely to likely scale just to ease the interpretation of understanding and communication of what these contours represent. And also for this exact same location, you will get a climatological record that corresponds with that location and the time periods that you selected. And I will show you what that looks like. So here on the left, you can see what that meteorology table looks like. So once you've selected your location and your time of year and hit run, 20 seconds to 30 seconds later, you will get a full summary at that location for these fire weather data. So you get the minimum, the maximum, and the average. So for example, here, for wind speed, you can see that on average, the wind is about 1.7 meters per second, but you can range all the way up to 3 meters per second or really calm winds. Similar to relative humidity. On average, it's about 36%. However, at the most, it's around 70% and as low as 15%. The goal with this is that you can compare different times of year to narrow in on what time of year is most likely to give you a good burn window. And then here, I also just want to highlight that these receptors that I talked about before, so the education receptors include public schools, private schools, childcare centers, colleges, and universities. And the healthcare receptors include general medical and surgical hospitals, long-term care hospitals, and elderly care facilities. So for those contours that we just looked at, where you have everything from very unlikely to very likely, you get a sum of the number of these facilities that might be impacted, and you also get a direct zip code list. So again, when you're comparing different times of year for a burn at a specific location, you can kind of play around with the different months or a different week to see if you're less likely to impact education and healthcare facilities if you choose that week and the kind of that burnt fire weather regime. And lastly, I'll just add that the zip code list is intended to provide an easy way to send out basically flyers through, the Postal Service, notifications to the local communities. Hey, we're planning a burn in your region in October of 2025, and it is possible that you may get some smoke impacts. Okay, moving on. Here is just an image of what a smoke probability would look like. And I just want to add here that we've made it customizable so you can look at topography, satellite imaging, and you can also look directly at roadways. And on the map, you can directly zoom into the healthcare and education facilities, and it will actually tell you their specific name. Again, the goal there is to make communication as easy as possible and acknowledge which facilities might need a little bit more notice or a little bit more attention prior to a prescribed burn. We also tested this with some folks that are very familiar with filling out burn permits. And in some air basins, there is a need for a 5-mile and a 20-mile buffer zone from the fire location. So we did include the option to overlay those on a map. So you can see those by the dashed black line is your 5-mile radius and your 20-mile radius of the expected burn location. All right, almost done with the general overview before our case studies. Lastly, again, to make life as easy as possible, you can download a full copy of the report. So once you've done a run and you've gotten your receptors, you can download that report, you can staple it to your burn permit, you can staple it to your smoke management plan, or you can then save and have table discussions and planning discussions around those different scenarios. So you can cross compare and you really can kind of chat about them more and narrow in on your planning for a prescribed fire. And then lastly, that zip code impact list is a text file that can be opened in Excel. So you can download that and use that directly to create those flyers, send those out through the mail, and can be readily used pretty simply. And then lastly, I know I mentioned that we are not explicitly including emissions in this, as well as the fact that we are not a replacement for day of go, no-go decisions. We are not a replacement for day of. We are a planning tool. But we did provide some links here, such as the Blue Sky Playgrounds, the piled fuels, biomass and emissions calculator, and to the PFAS prescribed fire incident reporting system. If there's other links that you can think of that would be useful and handy to click on directly from this website, we're more than happy to include additional ones. Okay, that was a lot of information and a lot of me talking. Next, we will be going into our very specific, hey, how do I use this tomorrow and how do I make my life easier? But I do want to take a quick pause and see if there is any questions that came through on the chat or any questions that are specific to the kind of background information or the overview.
So the chat has been fairly lively, and I'm scanning through
Okay,
just to see several things have been answered already.
great.
There are a couple things that I don't think I've seen answers to in the chat yet, so I will just pick out a few of those for you. So one question is, what are the source of the receptors that are included and how frequently are those updated?
Great question. Those, and I'm scrolling backwards, those are actually from the Homeland Infrastructure Foundation level data set. It's a national level data set that's updated by the federal government. This was last updated on our end in 2023, so we did not update for 2024. That is something that we can update rather easily, and I do think that would be part of, again, this is in its temporary location. Once it moves to its permanent location, and if you think it's important, or we'd love feedback on if you think it's important to update that on a regular basis, that could be done on a rotating schedule, say annually, semi-annually. But I would need to check how often that data set is updated on the federal level.
Excellent, thank you. And then let's see, one more that I don't think I've seen an answer to is, what is the priority of this tool to high split?
The priority of this tool to high split?
Yes, that question, I suppose if someone wants to add clarification on that question or add detail, you can either put it in the chat or raise your hand, or we can save it for the Q&A at the end if you want to add a more detailed version of that question.
Got it. Yeah, I'm not entirely. High split is the model that we use. So high split basically distance equals rate times time. It tracks a piece of air in the atmosphere and it moves it along with the winds. So to generate these, let's go here, to generate these fields, right, these smoke transport probabilities, we run high split from every single possible grid location. And we run that repetitively, and we compile all the high split trajectories that come out. So all the possible pathways that air could have taken over the last 20 years. And those are then aggregated together to create a probability. So I'm not sure if that was what the question was asking, but I'm hoping that kind of clarified a little bit.
Great, thank you. There's additional ongoing kind of discussion in the chat, but I think those were the ones that I didn't see any response to yet.
Okay.
So I'm sure there will be plenty more for the Q&A and the discussion.
Yes. Oh, hi, Lee. I see you have your hand raised.
Yes. So give me 1 second. I can allow you access to your microphone. Okay, you should be able to unmute, Lee. Okay, seems like you're unmuted. Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Hi. This is great. I mean, for the longest time, we've been wanting to have a tool that explores the patterns of dispersion that we all know are out there, and that the people who've been working for long periods of time in the complex topography, especially the Sierra Nevada and the foothills, where lots of burning is to be done, and in the climate, all those places, there's topography so often drives where smoke wants to go, right? So this is really great. I think one of the principles that comes up when looking at probabilities versus impact, especially for people looking to think about where the impacts are likely to be, and they're looking at a probability space, the probability space is much larger than the potential area of impact. And I want to just make that, and I think you agree with that too. So what you're seeing in some of these projections, even especially for the low probability area, is not the likely area of impact. It's the likely area where there could be an impact. And it's not the likely total area of impact. It's the likely total area of impact from especially small burns would be very small, but the potential for that smoke to go to a lot of different places still exists. So you might see a large probability space, a large probability field out there. That doesn't mean that you're likely to see smoke at any probability all over that area, that yellow area. So I just want to, before we start to, jump to conclusions about, smoke impacts and potential smoke impacts and public health over that entire area, remember that's a probability, not a likely area of impact.
Yes. Thank you so much, Lee. Yes, absolutely. And
Okay.
that's why we are a planning tool, and not a day of go, no go, right? So, months in advance, you can see, okay, where's the possible area where we can see an impact? That again does not replace your day of blue sky playground, your day of confirming with your air resources board that your air quality is okay to burn, and looking at the day of, wind patterns. But this at least provides an idea, right? It's kind of, like I said, doesn't answer every question about prescribed fire, but it's a first pass to see, especially, and you'll see this in the case studies with the CANSAC data being so high resolution, it really does flow with the topography. So you can actually see, all right, if you put a significant amount of smoke at this location, it is going to flow down this valley, and we can expect this community to be impacted. However, if you look at the full 20 years of what's happened in the past, there's still a chance it can actually flow kind of up that slope and end up in this community. And that's what it's trying to represent. What's the possibilities? And so, yes, as a planning tool, we do like in terms of erring on the side of caution, where, all right, what are all the possibilities and where might I impact groups in terms of a long-range planning tool? But again, why we are highlighting, we're not including emissions. You do need to obviously have a significant amount of emissions to have a significant air quality impact, and that we're not a replacement for the day of. So thank you so much, Lee, for pointing that out.
Okay, yeah, and just if you were to compare the day of blue sky run to this probability surface, you'd see it finger into one small fraction of that probability for surface, not the entire probability. So integrating all of the people underneath that probability surface would not be the appropriate way of assessing the potential impact of a given burn. So just want to nail that down for the public health people out here. Like, that's not what you'd use. Anyway,
yes, thank you. All right, let's jump into our actual cases and examples. All right, so our first case is the mountain prescribed fire, as we're calling it. This was an actual prescribed fire that was 16,000 acres that occurred in 2015. I have this location on the map. You can see it is has a lot of variable topography and was a significant fire at 16,000 acres, right? And this is in Northern California, close to Lake Tahoe. So because this is a multi-day fire, in fact, multi-week fire, and because it was so large, what we decided to look at in terms of actually putting this into the tool, we wanted to compare what did it look like if we only used 2015 versus if we had used all years. Again, theoretical cases, which we'll show. We filtered down to the specific weeks, in which case, and when this fire was burning, so the week 46 through 48 of the year, out of the 52 weeks per year. And we were looking at the 10 and 50% of the boundary layer heights. Actually, I apologize, I do believe that is a typo, 10, 50, and 80%. Thinking that because it was a multi-day burn, because it was such a large burn, that the smoke was going to be well mixed in that mixed layer. And because, again, this was a multi-day burn, using the full diurnal profile. So we wanted to use all times of day to make sure we were seeing how that smoke moves over the full day. Okay, so first thing we can see if we run this, I'll just add lastly, you can directly zoom into the map and click a location. You also can zoom in by lat and longitude, depending on your preference. Okay, so if we had only looked at 2015 for this 3-week period, you can see here there's a very unlikely scenario in which smoke does travel down towards the Central Valley, and there's some small pockets where smoke kind of gets funneled by the topography. However, we have a much different look at it if we use all the years. So the full range of variability that we see over 20 years. So we actually see a slightly different smoke pattern. We see a lot more smoke locally, especially there's a kind of a valley region that gets smoke pooled into it that is very likely to receive smoke, and some additional funneling to the Central Valley. And in this case, say this was a future fire that you were planning a multi-week fire sometime in 2025 at this location, we actually would advise you to use the full 20 years of climatology in 90% of cases. It provides the most possibilities, especially given that the highest resolution you can go to in our tool is about 1 week. And I just want to highlight, we did pull the HMS smoke from that specific case. So on this, you can see if you had only used the 2015 data and you looked at the HMS smoke, you'd say, oh, wow, it did not really capture our smoke plume. And again, that's part of the limitation of looking at a single day of what happened in real life versus looking at a 3-week window of what happened. You get some smoothing. And so that's why we thoroughly encourage you to use the full 20 years. And what the full 20 years does is it does open up what are all of the possibilities of what could have happened or what can happen. So say I am doing a multi-day 16,000 acre fire at this location in 2025, I want to look at this entire 20 years to see the kind of biggest range of possibilities. And so you can see here that the tool, when you do use all years, does capture the smoke from this location to some degree. Again, when you look at the day of go, no go, and you are using, like Liam pointed out, the blue sky playground, you would have most likely seen what is represented with the HMS. But the tool itself captured that as a possibility. So if you're planning a year in advance, you can see what the possibilities are. And along with that, you also can look at the expected fire weather. So you can see if you had looked at the meteorology, what your average wind speeds were for that time range, looking at the relative humidity in that time range, with the relative humidity ranging between 25 and 80%, but on average about 50%, and how that might fit into your burn prescription. Again, long-range planning. Where do we move our resources, and when can we plan on having our resources in certain locations? And then also with this, I just am showing here that the number of potential people, facilities, and zip codes that could be impacted at this time of year. But really, in this case, we just really wanted to highlight that, hey, if you're, again, planning a large multi-day fire a year in advance, say 2 months in advance, you can use this tool to get an idea of what the weather looks like historically at that location and that time of year, and seeing if it's a good time of year for your burn prescription. You can also look at what the possible outcomes in terms of smoke transport are. And again, we encourage using all 20 years of the climatology so that you can represent all the possibilities. And this again highlights it's not a use for the good day of go, no go. And there are obviously some limitations. And Lee, I see you have your hand raised again.
Yes, just wanted to point out that it seems like one of the things you could do with this is you could take that 20-year full possibility surface and compare and see how narrowing it to the month that you're planning a given prescribed burn for, how that narrows the potential possibilities and excludes a bunch of places that you want to potentially that you'd want to avoid impacts in. And so that difference between the full range and your planned burn window period might be one of the things that you could do with this planner to show how you're trying to narrow the potential impacts.
Yes, absolutely. And I will actually, the next case will highlight that as well. This is kind of just a first first case. And I see there's one other hand raised. I'm happy to answer that question now.
Seth, you should be able to unmute now.
Thanks. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Great. Yeah, just wanted to kind of follow up on Lee's comment. Well, first off, I'd just say thank you for producing the tool. But when I think about this as like a smoke risk tool, you know, assessing the smoke risk tool and finding, say, lining up on the best windows, that's kind of the way it's been presented so far. I see as the most ideal use. And it kind of take it a step further. And since there are some regulators on the call that are involved in the day go no go decision making process, I just want to kind of throw an idea out there is that, you know, we've yet to be able to identify, you know, the perfect windows, and we kind of know that, you know, we may need to take advantage of all windows. And so as we look at a future permitting process, maybe using a tool like this to narrow down the risk or kind of categorize a window as ideal or moderate, less than ideal, but still valid and compared to historic windows, maybe it could open up some opportunity for further approvals in the areas that that has been problematic to take advantage of those type of windows. Thank you.
Yes, and thank you for pointing that out. One thing I'll add as well, in terms of a history, you know, all of this data is pre-calculated, and in our case, it's aggregated down to the week level. But I think, you know, the only way we make progress on fire research and getting more fire on the ground is by sharing data, sharing information, and having these conversations. So if there's other uses that you see for the raw data itself, please let us know. We want this to be useful. And I do agree. It doesn't necessarily, since we're not including the actual emissions themselves or the air concentration, it's hard to make that next connection to risk, but it does allow this, when you're filling out your burn permit, especially for private burners, there's a lot of questions on who could be impacted, what your management plan is, how are you going to communicate? And I can't imagine, at least from what I've seen, that can vary a lot by the skill of the person filling out the permit. It definitely makes it frustrating for folks that are not familiar with the permitting process to actually fill that out, as well as for the reviewers. I'm sure you get a huge range of different, quality and different depth in terms of the burn permit and smoke management plans. So really the first pass on this is to be able to simplify that process and unify what you're looking at and say, okay, here is who can be impacted, and here is the very likely group we should plan, or at least plan communications to as part of our smoke management plan in the permitting process. And then closer to that day of go, no go, you already kind of have a short list of who to reach out to. So yes, thank you for highlighting that. Okay. Case 2, the San Diego prescribed fire. This again was an actual case in 2012, a much smaller fire at 5,000 acres. Here you can see the location on the map. Again, we do have some complex topography, but it is much more consistent, so less kind of mountainous and more just high elevation consistent. Near Middle Peak, and this happened in January 2012. Since this was a smaller, and this was also a single day fire, this was intended to be out within the next 24 hours. We looked at a single week, so just week 3, so the 3rd week of January. Again, we looked at this for just 2012 and then for all 20 years. We actually, in this case, had the boundary layer height smoke, the plume being kind of lower because it was a smaller fire, so 10 and 50% of the boundary layer. Some still significant mixing of that plume, but not necessarily fully flooding the mixed layer. And then looking at noon through kind of midnight, the midnight of that night. So not necessarily representing the full day on our profile, but a smaller window. And that does help kind of narrow down your probabilities. All right, so here's what we look at for 2012. And in this case, you can see that the smoke actually moves eastward in the 2012 case. However, if you look at all years, we have a lot of westward movement. These seem to contradict themselves, do they not? So if we actually look at the HMS smoke plume, again, with prescribed fires, it is really hard to get a good visual of what that smoke looked like historically. A lot of times it's missed by HMS smoke, and HMS smoke is only calculated once per day. And in this specific case, 2012, and only looking at 2012 versus the full time range, was actually a better representation. And the reason why is that it was a major La Nina year. So I think all of us know at least one forecaster that looks out the window on a daily basis and says, this day reminds me of, January 4th, 1992. We had weather exactly like this. I think we all know at least one person that works in the field that kind of just has a good sense of what this day looked like in the past, or what this time, what we're seeing this year reminded them of in history. And I think we're all really familiar with El Nino and La Nina years and how that does impact California weather quite significantly. So, moving forward, if you have a really strong sense of this weather is really reminding you of the specific day, the specific year, especially if it's a strong, El Nino, La Nina year, we do also encourage you take into consideration. And that's where, again, user input is so important. we'd like to think that AI and machine learning and all of those fancy things can make life easier, but I don't think there's any replacement for the human component. Your experience really does matter. And I do think we've hopefully made it easy to tailor your inputs to your past experiences. So in this case, I do think, HMS smoke here shows that Western movement of the smoke. And we did capture that for 2012 and those probabilities. And again, that's with a full week representing a single day fire. But in this case, because of that dominating weather pattern, 2012 was a major La Nina year. That weather pattern was actually different than what you would kind of accumulate over that 20-year period in terms of possibilities. So for this specific case, a small single day fire, you definitely want to narrow into more so perhaps that week if you know what week it is. And again, if you have a strong dominating weather pattern that you have seen in the past and that you are expecting, we do encourage you to use those user inputs to narrow in. Again, there is no replacement from for human experience. And so we wanted to make sure, again, with those options and the customized ability that you can represent that. Okay, I will, before getting to the third case, I will again pause and see if there's any specific questions.
We have one question that just came in the chat. In the case studies
Okay.
you shared, you mentioned the duration of prescribed fires. Could you let us know where to find data on how long each historical prescribed fire lasted?
Yes. So in this case, we were looking at a fire history mostly compiled from a mix of CAL FIRE records as well as looking at PFERS records, not that they're mutually exclusive. And if that data is of use, I think it would be good if we included a link to those locations in the chat. So it's kind of a mix of actually CAL FIRE records that we were looking at for specific examples where we were able to also see them on HMS smoke, so we can actually look at how our pattern compared. And a lot of those records, again, include the ignition location, the time of day that fire started, how many days that fire lasted, and its size. But if you're planning a brand new fire, I generally think, depending what information you have at the time, you will, if you know you're planning a very large fire, it's likely going to take multiple days and you'll want to represent that. If you're planning, say, a pile burn, you're more likely, all right, this will burn for 24 to 48 hours. You might want to narrow into that week that you're expecting to burn versus kind of a multiple week situation, just to narrow in on those probabilities. Okay. Case 3. And I think perhaps this might be one of the more relevant ones, planning for a prescribed fire in Sonoma County. So in this case, we want to identify the time period when environmental conditions and operational resources are favorable to conduct a prescribed burn. So specifically in this case, we know we have prescribed fire resources available in March or April, but we have to reserve them now, right? So say you are planning this burn, planning on reserving resources today, and you need to decide whether you're going to reserve those resources in March or April. And so for this location here, we chosen a location to the right of Santa Rosa, to the east of Santa Rosa in this forested region. And we want to decide, okay, if we reserve these resources, are we more likely to have good burn days in March or in April? So in this case, we selected the location and we filtered first by the month of March, and then we did a totally separate run with the month of April. I'll be showing both. And we didn't have a lot of specifics on what fire we wanted to, what type of fire, whether it's pile burns or we really just wanted to focus on the weather at that location itself to just narrow in what time of year to reserve those resources. And once we've reserved those resources, we can kind of narrow in on what the plume is expected to look like and how much we're going to burn on that day. So again, this is just getting a sense of the weather itself, not necessarily the smoke transport. So if we look and compare our meteorology, we can actually look at what the typical fire weather conditions are for March and April. And there is some seasonal changes in the weather between March and April, specifically in the temperature and the boundary layer heights and the lower soil moisture. So as much as March and April might not sound like they have dramatically different climates, this hopefully will help you narrow in on historically when you're more likely to have more burn days available to you. And so I think that this is a really great way to use the tool, especially given how many resources are available, and trying to plan even before the permitting process, just getting those resources on the books. And I do want to highlight as well that we did look at how this data and meteorology data compared to surface observations, because I know all of you are thinking that's all well and good, but does it work? How accurate is it? And so we actually did compare this to ASO stations, so weather stations on the ground, in this case, in both Santa Rosa and Petaluma, since there was no location that was perfectly co-located with this location. And we looked at each individual year, and we did have pretty good agreement if you look at this temperature. I do also have some aggregate versions of this, but we're really, really happy with the way that KINSAC represented the temperature at these locations based on what happened in reality. We've also looked at this for relative humidity, and again, I'm really happy with it. I know a lot of you do use the KINSAC forecast tool, so hopefully you've already experienced that personally as you use the tool versus what you see on the ground, but we did also want to make sure that we included some validation of this weather product, so when you do make these decisions and you do work on your burn permits, you could have some confidence in what you're looking at. So in this case, even before considering smoke, we can actually narrow down to what time of year is most optimal for burn days. And this long-range planning can help distribute limited resources. And we do feel that this 20-year climatology provides a representation of expected weather conditions by location. We're really excited by that. I will pause again briefly for questions on this potential use case.
We do have one question in the chat. Do you have any fuel/fuel moisture stats to go along with this meteorological data?
Yes, so that's a great question. In the meteorology data, we did include soil moisture as a proxy. We do also have the vapor pressure deficit. And again, that would represent a full week. So if you're looking at the relative humidity and the soil moisture over a full week, it's hopefully indicative of the fuels, but the fuel moisture is not explicitly considered here. And mostly because there's no really good history, climatology of fuel moisture. It is very tough to find. And it also varies quite a lot. I know historically the go-to place for fuel moisture is raw stations. They are pretty far spread apart. If that's something of use, that is data that we can look to include in the tool. So if you think having historical raw stations to compare to in the tool is something useful, that's feedback we would love to have, and a great potential add-in at a later date. Okay, before we get to the formal kind of Q&A and discussion, I do want to also highlight a potential use case for wildfire. We do have a lot of great tools out there like Blue Sky, like the HER Smoke tool, the HER Smoke forecast. However, a lot of those tools take time to run. And specifically, for example, HER Smoke only accounts for what's currently burning. It does not account for fire growth, right? So the smoke expectations or the smoke forecast is only showing based on what's currently burning. So in the case of, for example, the Palisades fire, the second that fire started, you can technically go to this tool and select, all the way through that pyro-CB, full smoke through the atmosphere, and look at the month of January and just say, all right, smoke is coming from this area. Who should we start messaging to that you might be impacted by smoke? And so I just wanted to show that this, and again, during the Q&A and the feedback part, see if this could be of use. Again, this is not a replacement for the monitors that are on the ground. So this is not a replacement for HMS smoke, even though that's only produced a single time of day. This is intended for that first pass of starting to get those notifications out. So at the same time as the fire information is going out, You can also be communicating to these zip codes and these locations who are very likely to be impacted by smoke at these locations. Take precautions, close your windows, things of that nature, as well as communicate directly with elderly care facilities that are, in this very likely bin, etc. So this is, again, this tool is aimed at prescribed fire planning, but there is this potential use case in kind of emergency management. Just kind of get that smoke messaging across as we're waiting on blue sky runs, as we're waiting on the HERS smoke to update, as we are waiting on the next day's HMS smoke. And again, the monitors can be pretty spread apart. So I did want to highlight the possibility of this as a wildfire tool. All right. I know I've been talking a lot, and so I did now want to transition to Q&A. So not only will I be participating in Q&A, but the whole team will contribute to Q&A. And really, we open the floor for any technical questions on the data used, the methods, using the dashboard itself, its parameters, really any Q&A. From here, we will have a discussion on what you think will make this more useful and additional use cases that should be highlighted. But are there any questions for us on the tool itself?
And this is a reminder, please raise your hand if you have a question or put it in the chat. I'll be monitoring both to let folks unmute or read out your questions.
Well, there's no question now. I'm sure there will be questions when everyone has the link to the tool and gets to use it for themselves. So we will have point of contact information on the website itself, and you're more than welcome to reach out to us once you've played around with it on your own. So in that case, I will probably give.
We actually have had one question just come up here in the chat.
Great.
So for pile burning, does this accommodate how long it has been since the piles were created? This affects piles that creep and get into the dust.
Great question. Again, we are not explicitly including emissions or necessarily the fire area, right? So you would still want to calculate using the pile burn emissions calculator and things like that are linked elsewhere. So this is run on a 2 kilometers, right? So if your pile burn is creeping into the depth and it's become an area source, hopefully it's still within a 2-kilometer buffer, in which case that smoke probability and that weather probability, the fire weather probabilities, the fire weather statistics should be the same in that 2-kilometer area. In the case, for example, that first case where we were burning 16,000 acres, that's a very large area. And there's a chance that if we would suggest if you're going to run the smoke probability, you might want to run it at a few places because, the air transport can be different depending on your starting location, whether it's at the top of a hill versus in a valley, especially given a source that's that large. Okay, and I see this comment here in 2023, the 20-year-old pile burns burned. Yeah, I agree. Yeah, hopefully this could be, again, part of the use and something, again, hoping to plan in your burn permitting. This is a possibility. We need to plan for this, or this needs to be considered on the day of. And that's the goal, again, to make your life easier. So you don't necessarily have to run Blue Sky Playground 50 times or kind of be in a crisis mode the day before because the wind patterns have shifted. This allows you to account for different possibilities well in advance. And to that point, I really actually want to lead us into this discussion phase because I'm sure there'll be plenty of thoughts and opinions. what additional data or options or integrations do you think will make this more useful? Are there use cases that you see that I haven't accounted for here? Like exceptional events comes to mind for the air resource folks. And if there's any thoughts on the long-term accessibility of this tool, whether it be hosted individually as its own website or integrated with tools that you already visit on a daily basis. I leave the floor for you all to tell us if you have any thoughts.
Let's see, we have a couple of things coming in the chat, so I'll read those out so that they're,
Great.
Everyone in the larger group can hear them as well. We have one suggesting mapping layers for air districts and air basins to be available in the tool, it looks like.
That is a great suggestion. We have note takers from the team, so all of these things, please share. They will be noted and accounted for.
Okay, and we have another comment. Great presentation and excited to use this powerful resource. I fully realize this is a big ask, including some sort of analysis on district burn day authorization likelihood based on, sorry, making sure I'm reading this correctly. Yes, including some sort of analysis on district burn day authorization likelihood would greatly help the prescribed fire planning. Another useful tool would allow for users to enter their prescribed fire prescription thresholds to block out days that typically don't meet the burn criteria.
Yes. Yes. I will say the team has brainstormed that many times where you can kind of narrow in on the weather conditions. That would be an ideal add for sure. And in terms of, yeah, so one issue, we had also considered, can we, instead of just providing the fire weather data itself, can we provide likelihood of meeting a burn prescription for that basin? I will say each California air basin seems to have slightly different rules in terms of their decisions. And there is, again, a human component there that can't be represented with just data. However, I know on the CARB website, there is a very long record. I've stared at it quite a bit. It goes all the way back, I believe, at least through 2010 or 2008, which shows you every historical burn day in the past, and if it was an allowed burn day, a marginal burn day, etc. So I do think one option for us is to add that link to our useful links on the website. So if you're looking at a certain time of year, you can look back at the historical burn days to see what happened in the past and how much land was burned on those days historically. But yeah, I would love to also make that dynamically possible. I think we would need all of the air basins, if you're listening, to coordinate with us on what your specific rules and regulations look like specific to your air basin.
We have a note in the chat that CARB has burn day information on paper going back to the 70s.
Wow. Anyone else have some grand ideas or plans to throw at us?
Okay, let's see. We have a couple of more comments in the chat here. So I'm just parsing through for which ones have a question associated with them. Okay. Is there a best point of contact to schedule a follow-up?
Yes, absolutely. So I will provide, actually, I can put it in the chat for my email address, and feel free to reach out to me directly. And then Farnaz, I'll also leave it to you as the PI and the lead of the project to also add your email address. for contact as well. I would encourage you to basically just CC us both, and we're more than happy. I'm more than happy to answer any questions you have in the future. Again, the whole point of this is using the scientific tools that exist to hopefully make your lives easier right now. Again, there's so many unknowns with prescribed fire. We're so limited with the amount of monitors we have on the ground, the resources that we have. Again, this is that first step to hopefully unify this process and make it a little bit easier for you all.
One additional suggestion, if you included census tracts and summarized population under the different likelihood fields, then when you narrow that probability by limiting the time of year at which you're planning to burn, then you'd have an estimate of how many people potential exposure was avoided for.
Yes. Yes, exactly. And so that's why, with that print function and say, if you print out two scenarios, you can compare, okay, well, in our very likely bin, we had 8 schools in this scenario and only 2 in this scenario. Maybe this is the better time, less likely to impact those education facilities.
And
Yes.
one more comment. It seems like you saw that one, but I'll just read it out so that everyone can see it here or can hear it. You said earlier in the presentation that this tool is currently available. Can you share the web address in the chat?
Yes, in about 5 minutes. But before I share that tool, as the discussion is flowing a bit, and if you don't want to provide your thoughts in the chat or live, please, 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 it's clickable. You don't need to type anything. 5 questions. It's a major help to both us as a project team, the tool as a whole, and for CAL FIRE to look at the future of this tool, where it will live long term, what sort of updates to make it useful. We do have this 5-question, very short survey. We'll also put the link in the chat. It would be, again, extremely helpful to making sure that tools like this continue to be useful and are improved to meet what you need. So I'm going to hover on this slide for exactly 2 minutes, because that's all the time you need to click through it, I promise. And Charles also added that link to the chat. And I promise to share the website link right after this 2 minutes.
Let's see, I was just scrolling back up through the chat. I think I found one more question that I don't think was addressed in the chat yet. So your first use case for the mountain prescribed fire, was that located in El Dorado County?
That's a good question. I would need to double check. And to that point, maybe we should have the county lines available on those maps as well. So if you want county maps on inside the tool, that's a great suggestion to add in the survey. Because that's something we could easily add and implement before it moves to its permanent location.
Fantastic. And then this was addressed in the chat as well, but just so that everyone knows, the workshop is recorded, so it will be available for folks to view after as well if you missed part of it, or if you know somebody else who would benefit from learning about this tool or might have good feedback about it. You can share that once it's available.
Okay. Now, my kind of last slide here does indeed include the location of the tool. And I just want to add, I'm sure everyone is so excited about the tool and everyone's about to go click on this website and really all use it at once. Just please be patient. When everyone is using it at once, it obviously will slow down. I do think we'll probably end up having a flood of those folks, you all clicking on that link for the next hour or 2, and it might be slower than usual. Again, once it's moved to a permanent location, it'll be in this location for the next few months. Once it moves to a permanent location, we can include the capacity for the number of users that can be using it all at the same time. So if you're having some slowdowns or experiencing any issues with that, again, please feel free to reach out to me via email. But I also ask for your patience, as this tool is, yes, publicly available and you can use it right now, but it is still in its prototype phase. So we're not entirely sure how many folks can use it at once before we have some significant slowdown. So, I appreciate your understanding with that as we work out the final location and how many folks we expect to be using it at the same time. And I do again want to thank CAL FIRE for funding this project and seeing the value in kind of taking this first step and helping us get more beneficial fire on the ground. We also want to thank the California Climate Investments Program and providing the funds through the cap and trade program to make this work. And obviously our collaborators at the Desert Research Institute and all of our collaborators at Sonoma Tech. And I know we still have technically another 30 minutes available for Q&A. So if there's anyone that wants to continue discussion and continue asking me questions, please go ahead.
Hopefully folks saw this in the chat, but one note from Charles: you must click on the map to initiate data processing. So for anyone who's trying to use that tool, please don't skip that.
Yes, you need to pick the location.
Smith, are you gonna this is Tadashi, are you gonna stay on while people are kind of poking around with the tool and for questions? Was that the plan? Or
yeah, I'm more than happy to stick around. Originally I was planning on talking for a full 2 hours, so you all have gotten left get maybe 30 or so minutes back, depending. Apparently I talk a little faster than I thought. But yeah, I'm more than happy to stay around and answer any questions if anyone's testing this out in real time. Again, please be patient. I know if we're all clicking it at the same time, it might slow down.
Yeah, there's still 60 people on, so I'm guessing that most of those folks are messing around with the tool right now. So
yep,
might be good use of the remaining time to hang out and see if anybody
absolutely
has questions. Thank you also for the presentation. It was great. Thank you.
Yeah, just because some folks may be starting to drop off soon, if they're not clicking around on the tool, I just want to take this opportunity to say thank you again for presenting this workshop and for the work that you've all done at both Sonoma Technology and DRI for developing this tool. We're very excited to see where it goes, and hopefully this is a good opportunity to get some input here as you continue to develop it. And just thank you again for developing it and for being here to share it with us today.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, and that's again why feedback is so important. For example, for the air resources folks, perhaps a great future addition would be to include historical air quality conditions. If in January you're already really close to the NAAQS standard, you're probably not going to get a burn day approval. Things like that are stuff we would love to have feedback on in ways that we could add additional data that might help narrow in on burn days even further. Thank you for the note, Jason. I'll also add that all of these cases are outlined in detail in the user guide that is on the website. So if you also, I usually learn by reading personally. So if that's a better method for you, please feel free to read through the user guide. There's also a fast start guide in there as well. And this meeting is being recorded, so you can go back and rewatch it anytime.
One question that I think I saw come up earlier in the chat and I'm not sure if it got covered in the presentation or if I may have missed it quickly there, but you had those different likelihood categories for smoke. And did you say what the kind of probability thresholds were for those different categories?
I did not, but luckily I have that right here. um, so between 10 and 20% is the very unlikely, 20 to 35% unlikely, 35 to 50% likely, and greater than 50% likely. And the reason why these bins are designed like this is due to some of the uncertainties with the high split model itself. So I know some folks are thinking, wow, 10%, that's actually likely in if you were using a different model, or anything that's greater than 50% being very likely. Might sound a little bit low for you, but we tested this out with various bins, and we did a lot of sensitivity testing on this. And based on the model data that outputs and the grid resolution, these thresholds were chosen.
Great, thank you.
Sam, this is Ximing. Sorry if I missed it, but it might be good to mention how to access the user's guide and the useful links.
Sure. Yes. Let me go back.
Actually, yeah, on that last slide you were on, there the buttons were actually there.
Okay. Yeah, I have a zoom in of those buttons. So on the website in the upper left corner, there's a button called links, and that will bring you to the links for PFERS, Blue Sky Playground, and the piled fuel biomass calculator. And then if you hit this page info button on the upper left, let me go back to that. It opens up this disclaimer, and then the user guide is linked right there. You can click on that to get to the user guide. I'll also just add a fun tidbit that it's thanks to CAL FIRE and the CCI program that this tool is available for California, as well as CANSAC. And we recently presented on a little bit more on the scientific aspect of this project at the national level at a weather conference, and there's a lot of regions of the United States that were very jealous and excited to see how you all in California use a tool like this, especially in locations where states are a lot closer together and are often impacting each other with their prescribed fire smoke. So I just want to highlight once again, CAL FIRE is leading the nation in terms of approaching, prescribed fire and beneficial fire and the smoke impacts and planning. And there does seem to be, a lot of excitement about possibilities in building upon this tool at the national level, which we are also as a team excited for. So again, highlighting that feedback is extremely important. And any time you use this tool, even if we're always open to feedback. If you use it a month from now, please feel free to email me and say, hey, this was really useful when I used it for this, or this was not useful in this case. Please, the more information we get back, the better.
So we do have one more question in the chat here. More of a research question. Can this tool be used to quantify the expected overlap between days meeting burn criteria and the days likely to receive burn authorization from air districts? Could highlight the narrow window and allow for more informed discussion about how to increase pace and scale.
Yeah, so I do think that can be done, right? I think adding in historical burn allowances to the tool would be one way to do that. Basically pulling those CARB records like I mentioned before, by air basin, and making that either directly available in the tool, cross-referencing the days. That would take time, and some additional development to do, but I do think it definitely can be done. I also just think in general, the data that's been produced for this, like all the historical fire weather data that has been produced by DRI can very easily be used in conjunction with that data, even outside of the tool, right? Just doing a cross comparison, whether that be in Excel or your favorite programming language, or you know, I do think that that can easily be done with, if not the dashboard itself, with the data that's been produced for the dashboard.
Great, thank you. Since we still have 34 attendees on the call, I'm assuming there are still plenty of people poking around in the tool itself at the moment.
Yes,
But
I'm
at
more
least
than happy to.
for some basic feedback, it did seem like it was still producing those contours pretty
great.
pretty quickly.
That's great to hear. We haven't completed, very extensive load testing. We've all tried to use it as a few of us at once to see what happens, but we hadn't gotten a chance to test it with 40 people looking at it at the same time. As you can imagine, that's a little hard to coordinate.
This is Tadashi. I was wondering if the tool is fairly snappy for me too. Just takes a second to gin up the results. One very minor thing would be it took me a second to like understand that you had to click on those three buttons at the bottom or the two buttons at the bottom to update the results. I'm sure there's a user guide that is available that would have made it obvious, but you could just put a little note on there that says click here for transport and weather outputs or whatever once you have all your parameters.
Yes.
But actually I did have a question, which was maybe you addressed this already, but like how do you define the four categories: likely, highly likely, and unlikely and very unlikely? Are those just quantiles of smoke impacts from the runs, or like?
Yes. So once you've narrowed in, say you're using all 20 years, all heights, all days, it basically pulls in all of that data. I know this is a really crazy slide, which is why I didn't show it originally. And so you can see there's hundreds of thousands of points.
Mhm.
And based on the maximum number of points you can possibly have, it is normalized into percentages. And we set those thresholds for 10 to 20% as very unlikely to greater than 50% being very likely. And the reason why those percentiles or those percentages were chosen were based on sensitivity testing that we had done with the high split output itself. High split, obviously it's a model and it's not perfect. So there are, and we did also apply, I'll move forward here, from the raw data that comes out of that probability, these contours that allow you to really get a better sense of what that data is telling you. And so that 10 to 20 and greater than 50, those thresholds are based on testing that we had did and compared to, say, HMS smoke to establish.
Got it. Thank you. And at the descriptors for those, just because I'm sort of coming at this from I don't know, maybe sort of a layperson standpoint, like what is the reaction that you've gotten from those the descriptors, I guess?
Yeah.
I guess like
So
the very unlikely, like a 20% chance of smoke reaching a particular grid cell. I don't like intuitively to me, like I'm not sure that I would use the term very unlikely. I don't know if there's a better term, you know what I mean? But like, have you got any reactions to that, like 4-class
we've had
descriptors that you guys are using?
that exact reaction where 20% being unlikely doesn't sound right, but it is 20%. And again, this is part of the way that high split works, where so yes. Okay. I'll start with saying the reason why we use like the very unlikely to likely is that's what's used in the IPCC and a lot of climate change communications, where so these bins are often used in communicating with folks and have been proven in kind of social behavior and social sciences, which is why we went with those versus. I do think looking at the raw percentages themselves, it's easy to misinterpret, especially given uncertainties with high split as a model, which is, you know, an entire complex discussion all on its own. And I will say, you know, the very unlikely category, the way I would interpret it in terms of more words, would say it's not likely to happen, but it could, right? It's
right.
Whereas the very likely category, you're like, if you really produce any smoke in this area, you're gonna get it there. And the very unlikely category, again, is representing the fact that we do not include the smoke emissions. And in a small prescribed fire, you're not producing enough emissions where a significant concentration is making it over there. However, you know, depending on your case, if you are doing a 16,000 acre fire, there is a chance that you're producing enough smoke where it's possible it reaches those areas. So it's kind of a way, again, to represent the unknowns and the uncertainty, representing all possibilities. That 10 to 20% does indeed sound high, but it's really, if you look back at, it's a relation of how kind of spread out these points can get from different locations and how variable the data is in that location. So it's not really a one-to-one, and I don't know how the best way to describe it in statistically, which is why we went with the categorical names. It's more of it's especially with the prescribed fire. This is a long shot, but it's possible. So we don't want to say this could never happen.
Sure. Yeah. No, that's that makes sense. And it sounds like there's some thought put into rationale behind it, and I do get it. But I was like, very unlikely. What does that mean? But that's good.
Yeah, and that's where, again, the limitation of not explicitly including emissions, where, again, the human component comes into play. If you're doing a pile burn, you can basically ignore the very unlikely category, right? You're not producing that much smoke.
Well, we haven't had any new comments coming in the chat in a little while. So I'm going to propose that maybe we end the recording, but we can feel free to stay on. And if folks have, any additional questions as they're going through the tool for the next few minutes here, then, we can have it be a little bit of a, not that this was, super formal discussion, but a little less formal discussion. People can just jump in with any questions they've got as they're kind of going through the tool still.
Absolutely.
Okay, fantastic. In that case, I'll end the recording, but we'll plan to stay on for at least another few minutes here.